Welcome, everyone, to our final panel discussions of our 21st Aspen Ideas Festival. For those of you who were out last night at Smuggler Mine, howling at the moon, it was a memorable night, certainly one of the most spirited Aspen Ideas experiences I've ever been a part of. And it was a harbinger of things to come as we seek to have even more distinctive and memorable experiences, community celebrations as a part of future festivals. Please join me now in thanking all who made this festival possible. Hold your applause for a second. Our underwriters, our patron pass holders, our speakers, our fellows, our moderators, our trustees, our volunteers, the entire Aspen community. Thank you all. A special thank you to our 2025 festival designers and leaders, guest curator Fareed Zakaria, his executive producer, Tom Goldstone, our extraordinary Harmon Eisner artist in residence, the musician Teddy Abrams, our executive vice president Jin-Hee Kim and festival director Graham Veazey, and especially all of those hard-working, panel-creating, service-oriented, tent-building, mic-running, hot dog-serving staff that made it all possible. Thank you. The arts and culture are, as we all know, integral to this festival and to all that we do at the Aspen Institute. Looking ahead, as we anticipate the 250th anniversary of the signing of the Declaration of Independence, we are excited to announce here that next year's Harmon Eisner Artist in Residence will be that visionary poet of the American experience, Ken Burns. And now we have a chance to have a great discussion led by Politico White House Bureau Chief Dasha Burns in conversation with Secretary of the Smithsonian Lonnie Bunch and the celebrated historian Annette Gordon-Reed. Thank you. Join us, please. Thank you, Dasha. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Annette. Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Okay.
Hello, Aspen. This is one of our last panels here. Can you believe it? Did you guys have a good time? Between the food, the drinks, and the conversation, I'm feeling very, very full here and get to have a conversation with two brilliant minds about a pretty big anniversary that's coming up here, the anniversary of these United States. And I want to take a big step back and take a big picture view of what this moment means. And Lonnie, I want to start with you to set the scene here. 250 years coming up next year. And this is coming at a moment when, well, the world seems to be on fire. There is hefty debate, hefty polarization. There are challenges. There are also opportunities. What does this moment mean? 250 coming at this particular time in history.
I think it's important to realize that normally we have these events and they're all about celebration. I think this is a time that we have to find the right tension between celebration and commemoration. And to really help people understand that the 250th has to be about illuminating both our history and our future rather than erasing our history. And so I think that's going to be the real challenge. And I think it's going to be interesting to think about how this gets wrestled with around the country. What's going to happen in Washington, D.C., what's going to happen around the country. And the key is that this is really less about a moment and more about what the way we will celebrate the 250th will tell us a lot about how, as a nation, we think about expertise, we think about history, we think about complexity, and we think about nuance. So I think it's really, yes, we're going to celebrate Jefferson and the writing of the Declaration of Independence, but it really, if you keep your eye out, you'll really figure out where we're going as a nation by the way we celebrate this.
By the way we think about and talk about our history, right? Annette, you write about Jefferson's contradictions and how they're alive in us as we are about to mark 250 years of his declaration that proclaimed all men are created equal while hundreds were enslaved. He himself enslaved hundreds. What does Jefferson's legacy teach us? How do you talk to your students? How do you talk to Americans about this?
Well, the legacy is a mixed legacy. I mean, we value the Declaration and the ideas put forth in the Declaration and his work as a revolutionary. We mentioned the institution of slavery and how it created this contradiction. But his real legacy is the importance, I think, of a democracy. To think about what happened 250 years ago when Americans mobilized to shake off what they considered to be the tyranny of a monarchy and to create a government that was supposed to be a government of people, that's created by people and that the people are supposed to participate. So, in answering what you asked Lonnie, I would add to that 250 years is time for us to think about whether or not we're doing the job that we're supposed to be doing as citizens, to be vigilant, to make sure that tyranny does not return and that we participate and make the values of the Declaration of the American Constitution real. So, I mean, Jefferson is, for me, an interesting subject because he's a perfect way to think about all of the contradictions of the United States, the good and the bad, about race, about politics, all kinds of things. Foreign policy, it's all there. But instead of focusing on one man, think about the ideas that were put forth and the example that he can bring to the country to think about ways to be better.
I mean, to both of you, because I think you've touched on this in your answers, there's been this tension between the left and the right of renaming bases and schools and streets and all of these things. This, who do we celebrate? Who do we try to forget about? You mentioned erasure. How do you wrestle with this conversation at a time when there are folks that want to rethink history, and there are folks who take issue with how we want to rethink history? Like, how do you get a polarized America on board with at least a civil conversation about all of this?
Well, if we had the answer to that, maybe Lonnie has the answer to this. You go ahead. You tell us exactly what we're supposed to do to solve
division in America.
Solve
for me
division
right
in
now.
America.
I mean, I think it's so much of the work you've done. Part of it is making sure people know where the trusted sources are, right? To make sure that places like the Smithsonian are where you can go to make sure that you're going to get accurate history and you're going to get complexity. I think you're going to draw from the work of Annette and many of our other colleagues, and that, in essence, even though there's great debate, we've got to recognize that there are answers that are based on scholarship and research and answers that are based on politics. And I always go to the scholarship and research first, right? And then I think the challenge is to have the courage to stand to say, here's the issues that are really important. Here's the issues of complexity. I mean, I think your work you've done on Jefferson and slavery has really helped Americans understand the centrality of slavery in who we are as a people. And I think we have to make sure we don't lose those things in this moment.
Yeah, well, and also, one of my experiences has been is that people want to know what is true, the accuracy of things. People, and they don't mind a complex story.
Right.
They don't want, a sort of cartoon version of American life. They want to know what really, really happened. And so when I wrote my first book, I would go down to Virginia and I would be frightened because I'd think, oh gosh, I'm going to have to face these people. And I've said these things about Jefferson and slavery and Monticello. And people were enthusiastic. They want to know. And even people that debated me, but there was a moment, it seemed, that even if people disagreed, that there was a way to talk about these disagreements. And as you suggested, we've kind of lost that.
Yeah, I mean,
cultural thing.
To that point, like a lot of young Americans, especially on the progressive movement, have been really critical of the founding fathers and kind of see them as maybe irredeemable characters. How do you talk to your students about what the founding fathers represent, the importance of their contribution, but how to contextualize that in some of the harmful things that they embedded into our system as well?
Well, you talk about human beings and the fact that human beings aren't perfect, and you don't try to hide those imperfections. But what happened before, and sort of set, I would say, Jefferson and those people up for this, is creating this image of someone who's perfect, and then when you find out that that's not true, then you go all the way opposite direction.
Mm-hmm. The pendulum swings.
You swing this way, but try to say, no, think about a person at a particular moment and the issues that they faced at that time period and how they decided to resolve those issues, and what were the things that were useful and what were the things that we don't want to go along with it. So I think to emphasize humanity of the person, the frailty of individuals, along with the things that they did were a benefit, they respond to that. Students respond to that, and they don't have the same kind of notion of a hero worship that people of our generation grew up with. I think
maybe
that there's
a good
tolerance.
thing, but you can also go too far, right?
You can go too far, but I think it's a good thing for people to have a balanced sense of the people, because you really don't understand the greatness of individuals if you don't see them as human beings. If they were all gods in some way, of course that's what happens, because that's what they're supposed to do. But this is a person these are people who were struggling with against the greatest, well, France would say they were the most powerful nation on earth at the time, and they won with the aid of the other most powerful nation, France.
We are still so young. 250 years, that's a drop in the bucket compared to some of the historic empires of Europe and Africa and Asia. How do you contextualize this experiment that we're in right now, where this experiment has gone in 250 years and where it's going? I know I'm asking you guys really easy, simple questions.
Yeah, I know.
Right?
I mean, I thought this was going to be a cakewalk. We just here with these fundamental questions facing us.
I mean, I think part of what one should take thinking about the 250th and our relatively short history is the notion of the aspirational sense of America. I mean, what comes out of the work of Jefferson and others is this sense of what is possible through aspirations, right? And so what I think you see and what I would celebrate for the 250th is that almost every group who has tried to make America better draws from the Declaration of Independence, that it becomes in a way a totem, that whether it is Frederick Douglass or whether it is women's rights, you see people going back to the ideals of the founders, especially Jefferson. So on the one hand, you want to make sure that we are celebrating that, because what has happened is, I would argue that people have made concrete Jefferson's aspirations, Jefferson's ideals, and they've used that to struggle. So for me, any discussions about the complexity of America, the challenges of America, they aren't things you should run away from. They're things you should embrace and go, look at how the country has evolved and improved over time, basically building on some of the language of the founders.
Do you think that this experiment, because there are a lot of people I talk to that are like, the experiment's not working. The experiment has failed. It's all over. Let's pack it up and try something else. Do you think that's the right approach? Or are we just in one of those stages in the experiment where like maybe the beakers are exploding a little bit, we got to clean up and try a new formula?
Pack it up and do what? I mean, pack it up and become Hungary? Pack it up and become a dictatorship, pack it up and do away with the ideals of the founders. There are always times you feel disillusioned about things, but you also have to think about what it took to put these things in motion, and that democracy and republic is a fragile thing. I mean, it's a story that some people might think is apocryphal, but I hope it's not, with Franklin saying, when someone asked him what kind of government they had formed when they were in Philadelphia, and he said, a republic if you can keep it. And that if you can keep it tells you that this is something that you have to work at actively all the time. So if people are sort of impatient with where we are, this was never going to be something where you could just say one and done. You know, it's there, and now we have no responsibilities. It's always going to be a struggle.
And I think the idea of an experiment also implies that it is constantly evolving, right?
Absolutely. I mean, I really do think it's a notion of looking at this place, at this country, as a work in progress. I really think that's the way to look at the struggles you have and to not sort of downplay them because they're significant and important, but to recognize that there's a long history of grappling with these challenges. And I think the key is to understand, how do you fight for the values inherent in the Declaration to make sure those values don't get lost, but that you really make sure that people have the greatest of confidence that not that this too shall pass, but that the country will persevere. But you have to think about what's the damage that will be done.
And you have to think about participating. I mean, it's a participatory sport. It's not just out there and then everything is said. And I sometimes fear that Americans think, I mean, American exceptionalism has made us think of ourselves as exceptional, that this is a city on a hill and so forth. But that could make you complacent, and you think that everything is going to be okay. And it's not going to be okay if you don't make it okay.
That's right.
If you don't attend to things.
With this moment, there's going to be a lot of attention on the U.S. There already is, for better and for worse, in this moment. What do you think are the big messages that we should be thinking about and talking about? What is important to sit down and reflect on when we have this moment where both the world and the country are going to be really considering the history of these United States?
Well, I would always defer to you, but it seems to me that part of it is really talking about the fragility of democracy, right? That this is something that you've got to protect, nurture, debate, and fight for, and it's not something that just, can survive. So I want people to understand, as Annette said, that this is our struggle and that we have to participate in protecting this fragile democracy. The other thing is that, I think that what I'd like to try to figure out is how to find a kind of middle ground, right? On the one hand, you have a kind of sort of narrative that is sort of ultra-patriotic American exceptionalism, that we're always the good guys. And then you've got a narrative that a lot of us were trained in graduate school that raised a more critical eye, that talks about the flaws, that talks about the struggles. And I think the challenge for the 250th is for institutions who do this work to try to find that third narrative that says that there is something amazing that you can take away from the Declaration of Independence, but there is also something equally powerful about recognizing that even the founders recognized it wasn't a completed nation and that there was going to be struggles to get where one wanted to be. And rather than see the struggles as moments of embarrassment, I see those struggles as moments of growth.
And how do you create an idea of patriotism that has both of those things, right? Annette, I am curious, you talked about Jefferson being such an excellent example of thinking about the contradictions and the different themes that are embedded here. When we think about those moments and different parts of our history that would be good to either celebrate or learn from in these 250 years, are there other examples of inflection points in history or characters in our history that you want to be talking about next year?
There are many people. I mean,
Give us 2 hours?
Are you going to give 2 hours of people? You mentioned, Douglas, obviously, in his famous speech, What to the Slave is the 4th of July, who fixates on the Declaration, the words of the Declaration, and speaks ironically about being a black man, a former enslaved man, who's there at this celebration of the Declaration. But what does it mean to us? What does it mean to the vast majority of African-American people who were enslaved? But he ends with this idea that this is a work in progress, that's essentially what he's saying. I know that it didn't answer all the questions in 1776 about race and slavery, but we're moving towards that, and we can move towards that. So, Douglas would be someone. I mean, there are all kinds of William Lloyd Garrison. I mean, there's just this, and Garrison wasn't big on the Constitution, right. But on the Constitution. But the notion of of equality was something that was bedrock to him. So there are many people that I could mention, but most of them have at some point in their career recourse to the Declaration and the founding.
What's up with the Constitution? Like, how's it doing? How's it doing right now?
Not so well. I don't know. I mean, I was just telling Lonnie that this is the first time in my life where every aspect of my life, I'm a law professor and a historian, but as a historian, my hair is on fire. And as a lawyer, my hair is on fire, with things with law firms, and, I have students who are going off to law firms. And I'm at Harvard. So we're under siege as well. The Constitution is sort of up for grabs right now, and we'll see what happens. I mean, the notion of a separation of powers and three equally powerful parts of government, that's been sort of erased in a way. Congress has sort of moved away from its role there, and the lower courts seem to be holding the line in some ways, but we're not sure about the Supreme Court. So. It's a precarious, for me, and this is just my personal thing, it's a precarious moment.
Well, for the Smithsonian, it's a piece of cake,
Walk in the park.
Walk in the park.
I mean, I think that the real question becomes, how do you ensure that you can protect the people who want to do the history, tell the stories, work in culture in a way that they feel that they're not going to be censored, but that they can tell the complex stories of a nation. Because in some ways, I would argue that one of the great strengths of the work that Annette has done, and many people, is that I would give anything if for the 250th, we as a nation could be comfortable with embracing ambiguity. We tend to look for simple answers to complex questions all the time. And if we could think about nuance, complexity, subtlety, it would go a long way.
We're not so good at that right now.
We're not good, but America's always been aspirational. Yeah. So, my goal is to set out, here's the aspirations that we work towards. And I think you're right. I think the challenge is, how do you do that in an unbelievably contested time?
Well, and at a time when institutions have been subjects of a lot of suspicion and a lot of threats. I mean, you are at the Smithsonian. This is an institution that's supposed to be apolitical and serve all Americans. That is your goal. That is your mission. But how do you navigate that at a time when, there are a lot of people, left and right, by the way, that have become very anti-establishment, very anti-institution, and don't feel like those institutions are working for them?
Well, I mean, I'm an institutionalist, obviously, and I think that part of what you want to look towards are the institutions you can trust, that you can count on. And so my notion is you steer the Smithsonian in a way that allows us to sort of continue to be a place that you can trust when it comes to science, art, and history and culture. It also means that there'll be moments of great strife. Where we'll have to sort of fight to make sure that we have the integrity and the independence to do the work that we need to do. But my notion is that I have great faith, ultimately, in America's ability to look at itself, to understand itself. We're not there yet, but I have great faith that there have been moments in the past when it has and rallied round to make change. And I think the key is, do we have enough people who will stand up and now say, it's important to do the right thing, to grapple with history rather than run away from it? I always think of that line of Joe Louis when he had a fight with Billy Kahn, where he said, you can run, but you can't hide. And I think that's what I feel about history. You can run, but you can't hide. It will continue to shape you in profound ways. We as people are comfortable now recognizing our great-grandparents' DNA shaped who we are, but the history they experienced shaped who we are as well. And I think that's why it's important to grapple with history in this broadest way.
And one thing you were saying is that it's important to remember that other generations dealt with their problems too.
Exactly.
I mean, and they found ways to go forward, and we just have to as well.
I mean, that brings me to my next question, which is here and kind of everywhere I often get asked by folks, is there another time in history when we've seen anything like this? We keep using the word unprecedented. We have like a dollar jar at Politico for every time we use that because it's become so overused. But do you see a parallel in history to this moment and how we kind of came out of a period of turmoil like this? Or is unprecedented the appropriate word to be using over and over again?
I think unprecedented is an appropriate word because we're at a technological, things exist now that didn't exist in the past. And we're with social media, AI, the sort of speed of communication and so forth, we're at a point, and on the other hand, we're at a moment when we have gone through a civil rights era, a period where the expectations of individuals who have been marginalized have been raised. We've never been at a point, I think, where young people today on college campuses are much more, say, African-American students, people of color, are much more comfortable there because they think they belong there. When we went to those schools, it was just, okay, so we're glad to be here.
Well, and that's the point of how short our history is,
yeah,
too, right?
Exactly.
Like, it wasn't long ago.
It wasn't long ago. And so I think this is unprecedented because of all of the context. There are actually new things in place, and so it seems unprecedented to me.
And I think it's unprecedented on so many levels. You look at what's happening with the universities, and it's the federal government has more influence financially than it did during McCarthyism in the 1950s, right? Mm-hmm. And you really see this, as a historian, you could say, there have been times when administrations come in and say, we're going to change everything. There are times that they've said we can sort of bend the rules. There are times that they've said that our vision is the strongest vision for America, but I've rarely seen an administration that's got it all, right? That really has planned for it, worked on it, done the Project 2025. And so in a way, it is really a very unprecedented time. And some of that is positive. Looking at how do you think about the federal government? Definitely there were parts of the government that was bloated, but I always think that you cut with a scalpel, not a meat hook.
Or a chainsaw.
Yeah, chainsaw's good,
Yeah.
But I think that ultimately, I can't think of a time historically, I can think of a time where people were scared like this, but I can't think of a time where historically everything one believed in that one thought was accomplished is still now being called into question.
Well, and when you were speaking, it occurred to me, I was thought about the fact that haven't think of a time or any country that has destroyed its scientific apparatus. The 1776, the Declaration, those are products of the Enlightenment.
Yes.
And the Enlightenment was about progress. It was about science and so forth. So you take as a given that we're always going to be doing things scientifically, but the idea that you dismantle that, I don't think any country, any point has done that.
And I think there's a lot that's been taken for granted of things that are just norms that will keep going the way they've been going that have been totally thrown out the window, the rule books out. We have only a few seconds left here, so I just want to give each of you just a moment to send a message to our audience and those who are watching. What do you want people to be thinking about heading into this anniversary? What should be top of mind for folks?
The United States is worth fighting for. It's worth participating and being vigilant about, and that's what I hope people do.
And I think building on what Annette said, I want people to have hope, right? To look at a nation that has gone through so much, has evolved and changed in powerfully interesting and important ways. People get to sit on this stage that 50 years ago would have been, being waiters and butlers rather than sort of being part of the conversation. And so I have this sense that hope tells us that Americans find a way to make a way out of no way. They find a way to move a nation forward. So there is great hope. I'm not sure I have optimism, but I have hope. And that hope tells me that we will persevere as a nation. The question is, what's the damage and who is hurt and who really rallies around this nation in the future?
Well, and I think you both gave us exactly what we needed, which is you challenged us and you inspired us. So thank you both so much, and thanks to all of you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dasha. Thank you, Annette. And thank you so much, Lonnie. They give me hope. You all give me hope. I am really excited to have that conversation be the setup for the announcement that the 2026 Aspen Ideas Festival theme will be Declarations of Independence, the past, the present, and the future. And the year will mirror in terms of dates. It will be June 25th to July 1st, 2026. And we hope that all of you are a part of it. We sold out of Fest 1 and we sold out of Fest 2. It's why we've shifted registration up. So you can either at Marble Garden, at the closing picnic that will follow today's closing session, you can buy a pass for next year. And I also want to do a special shout out to all of our patrons, because the patron program allows for the largest class ever of Aspen Ideas Festival fellows. We had over 200 fellows. That definitely warrants. Here's the shot of the fellows from yesterday. We had over 200 fellows. They came from 40 different states, and they came from over 10 countries. And so next year, we're aspiring, as Lonnie said, to have all 50 states represented as we celebrate the 250th anniversary of the Declaration of Independence. It has been the privilege of me and the Aspen Ideas Festival team to have this shared experience with you all. And also while we celebrate the 75th anniversary of the Aspen Institute, and to be able to celebrate the different values that are so aligned with the ethos of this place has been truly moving and fulfilling. So from the bottom of my heart and on behalf of the entire team, thank you for your participation in the dialogues and the roundtables and the workshops and conversations as you are walking across campus. And I hope that you forged relationships with people that you didn't know, and that you reconnected with people that you may have known, but now that you've been able to go through this experience together, those relationships are stronger. It's now my distinct pleasure to introduce the next session. Sean Penn is one of the most celebrated actors in America. He also, with Ann Lee, co-founded CORE, and they're going to be in conversation with Mary Louise Kelly of NPR. And I just want to say that Mary Louise has been a longtime friend of the festival, and she's such an important facilitator of the national dialogue. So I'm thrilled to toss to a short film about CORE and then welcome the next session. So let's take a look at that film.
There's a number of groups that are working to try to do what they can. I want to bring in Sean Penn, who's got a relief organization, CORE. I'll explain what you're doing with CORE right now.
We were on the ground day one, working in the principal shelter at the Pasadena Civic Center, addressing immediate needs.
We are doing hygiene kits, menstrual kits, and 95 distribution. It's happening in our own backyards and affecting our own families. It would be remiss for us not to do something. We're focused on the short, medium, and long term in this response, doing cash programming as well as case management. And what that means is being very flexible to support communities and individuals and families to get on their feet, which is going to vary in so many different ways. In the short term, we're cleaning homes and we are managing the child-friendly space in the largest shelter. All of the huge support that we're seeing, that needs to be sustained.
If these people want to come back, we should do everything we can to help them back.
And that commitment to stay with the community, which CORE is committed to do, is going to be at least a 2 to 5 year dedicated effort, which we are committed to do all the way to the very end.
Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome. I'm Mary Louise Kelly. I host All Things Considered on NPR. Ann Lee and Sean Penn, as you just saw, are the founders and leaders of CORE, Community Organized Relief Effort. I want to say welcome, and it sounds like we nearly had to mount an organized relief effort to get you out of an elevator at the Jerome this morning. We were supposed to be the first panel. It was touch and go. We're very glad that you're here. Are you okay?
We managed our way out, thank you. But it was great to see how...
Mike, a little closer so we can hear you.
It was great how Aspen was able to pivot so quickly, so yeah. Impressive.
Yeah. So we just saw the film that was showing. This was about y'all's work in the LA wildfires earlier this year. I know you have worked there. You basically took over Dodger Stadium during the pandemic and administered, turned that into one of the nation's biggest COVID test sites. You've worked in the war in Ukraine. You have worked in earthquake in Turkey. We're going to get to as much of it as we can, but I want to go back to where you two came together and decided, I found my partner in this. This is Haiti. Sean, take us back. 2010, there's an earthquake. You show up in Haiti. Why? Had you been there before?
I'd never been, but I was in a situation, personal situation, where I'd had to sort of clear the deck professionally for what would have been an indeterminate period of at least 2 years. Mm-hmm. And then that changed, and it changed about 4 days before what happened in Haiti. And I had been, this is about 8 months into it. And suddenly I found myself without children, no longer married, and did whatever you do when you discover you're single and have no dependents in the house for the first 4 days. Failing, but trying, and coming home exhausted. And then I think it was the fourth day, I thought, well, what other freedoms do I have? And I turned on the television in the daytime, which I would have been yelled at for.
Yeah.
And I turned the television on right into the coverage of the Haiti earthquake. And I had gone after a few days to try to help out in New Orleans after Katrina.
Right.
And I had put it off for a couple of days because I thought one would be in the way of authorities who were doing the work. And then when I did go there, I had the experience of finding that the legitimate among authorities, certainly, and I would say most, felt very strongly all hands on deck, that there's no one organization. We need bodies and people that can, help. So that got the sort of sense one might be in the way out of it. And we got like 40 people out of the water in a day, which felt productive. So then when Haiti happened, I thought, well, one of the things they were reporting was that there was no intravenous pain medication. There were a lot of traumatic injuries, surgeries going on, and in particular the coverage was focused on children.
Yeah. And can I just make clear, you didn't, I think a lot of us remember seeing the horror unfolding on our TV screens in Haiti in 2010. Not many of us got on a plane and went and did something about it. You not only did, you moved into one of the 10 cities with the refugees and stayed there for how many months?
Well, what was supposed to be 2 weeks turned into 9 months.
9 months.
The first stretch. But summing it up, getting to how Ann and I met, when I heard about this pain medication thing, the cliche or the story, as I tend to tell it, is an actor in Hollywood knows where to find narcotics.
Yeah.
But uniquely, I knew where to find bulk narcotics. I had gotten in touch with Paul Farmer in Haiti, the late great, and he told me what was needed was 350,000 vials of morphine and ketamine. And I called Hugo Chavez and said, I've got a couple of friends, and we'll get some trucks and distribute it to. Paul was going to give us. I had known him.
You had Hugo Chavez on speed dial?
I knew him pretty well. I had written about Venezuela. And I told him, we'll get some trucks, you fly it in, and we'll distribute it. And they did. And so we went down there, and so that we thought 2 weeks we'll get to all the trauma centers and the hospitals. And while that was happening, I was watching what I'd always, heard about as noble work of the very brand name NGOs that I thought was much of it very dysfunctional and overlapping and bureaucratic. Uh-huh. And so we just started finding that young Haitians would see that we were very committed to what we were doing, and they would come up and say, we want to help our country. Can we work with you? And basically it was, if you'll teach us what to do here, what's needed, and bit by bit that was happening. Meanwhile, Ann was working for another organization, and she'd had a long history in disaster relief and development. She was working for an organization that had the heavy equipment. And there was a day where Lieutenant General Ken Keane, who was sort of the overlord of the military humanitarian response for the United States there at the time, called all of us that were working in the camp together because I'd asked him to come out in the middle of the night when the other organizations didn't work. They all had curfews and things like that. And it was at night that the monsoon rains would happen. And that this became very dangerous, kids would mudslide and so on. And so the idea was that he could provide Army Corps of Engineer to make a drainage mitigation plan. We would do X, they would do this, and it led to, so you two have to work together.
And pick up the story from your end. You are in Haiti. You realize Sean Penn is there. He's living in a tent calling Hugo Chavez, trying to find morphine. And you think, this is what I was waiting for? I want to get involved?
Well, let's just say that he has not forgiven me yet for how I kind of treated him when I first met him, which wasn't with the friendliest and most open approach. Definitely.
She was standing at that meeting looking down on me like, this fucking actor wants to get his picture taken. What's he doing in this place? And yeah.
I hear no lies.
What'd you say?
I said I hear no lies.
She hears no lies.
But, you know, after seeing that he was so committed and he was there living in a tent on the biggest displacement camp in the country for 9 months, I mean, everything changed. And then we became kind of thick as thieves every night, kind of at the end of the day, being able to talk and ideate. And he was exactly what we needed. You know, it was a complex crisis in an urban area. It's the first of its type in a long time. And having an outside thinker asking the questions of, but why does it have to be that way? Why are we doing it this way? So the usual systems that we get so used to and blind to was not acceptable for him. And he kept on thinking bigger and thinking, you know, dreaming bigger, imagining bigger. We should be returning people back home. Generally, a lot of these camps stay for 10 to 15 years on average, if not more. There's camps that have been around for about 50 years, for example, in Kenya. The camp that Sean ended up running with his initial organization was closed down in 5. That is unheard of because of this ability to kind of think bigger and not accept just what's right in front of you.
No. Sean, you also have an enviable reporter's knack for being in the right place at the right time. I want to shift us to Ukraine. And I wonder if you would tell us the short version of the story of how you ended up in Kyiv, in the bunker with President Zelensky the day Russia invaded?
Okay, the short version is a friend of mine and I, we were pursuing a couple of documentaries, and I'd spent a fair amount of time in Syria during the civil war. And I thought I wanted to do a documentary there. And at first, Assad promised a lot of freedom, access to things, and then the gatekeepers were squeezing on that. And bit by bit, I thought, well, the kind of documentary is going to take, that I can do something unique if I can, is just a kind of trust bond, you know. And then you say, you know, what happens, but you want to be trustworthy. Yeah. And there was no trust there. Probably smart, ultimately, on his part. But it was a lot of, and there was another one, sort of dark documentaries that we were looking at. So then my partner came to me one day, and he had met someone who knew this president who was being talked about a lot because he was a comedian who played a president, or a school teacher who became president on a TV show, and then became the president, and also because he'd had an interesting conversation with our president, Trump.
He's had a few of those, yeah.
So we thought it'd be fun to go there and do this sort of whimsical tale of this actor turned president and learn about Ukraine and the connections that now we're building. No new buildup. The skirmishes in the East had continued since 2014, but there were no at that point. And we were about to go to Ukraine, and then COVID happened. So I met President Zelensky the first time on a Zoom, and we agreed that we should meet in person before we start shooting. And he did agree that, in principle, to do it. And then by the time we were able to get to him, because the security was too tight around the head of state with the COVID stuff and all, and we all got busy with things, it ends up being that now the story's changing. And the buildup was happening. It was the threat of Russia invading. So the first trip was November, and we were meant to meet with the president, but something else came up. He was unable to meet, but we traveled. We went to Mariupol. We went to restaurants and clubs, culture trip in many ways. And then we went back February. And
February 2022.
February, right. And in February, every expert was, that you saw on television and read in the news, anticipating an imminent invasion. I didn't think it would happen. I still don't really understand the upside for Putin here. Short term, maybe, but not long.
I mean, Zelensky didn't think it was happen. I was in Kyiv in February, and a lot of people there didn't think it would happen. How did it change? Because as you say, you started out with one idea: we're going to make this film about this interesting guy, and then suddenly you're in the middle of an active war zone overnight.
Yeah, it became very clear it was going to happen. To me, it was clear about 3 days out. Putin had said some things that were pretty indicative of it. So it was imminent. But that's when we stuck around because we still hadn't met with Zelensky. We were there you have to kind of wait. And then he took the meeting on the 23rd. Is it the 23rd?
22nd, I think.
22nd.
Yeah.
So we had a great meeting. Very nice guy, and we agreed we'd start shooting the next day. We went back to the hotel. But of course, there was I was getting messages, in the red text from the government saying, get out, get out. But we stuck around and to preparing our cameras and decided get a little sleep, and then we'd start shooting in the morning. We got maybe an hour's sleep before the first rockets started coming in. Yeah. And then we got in contact with the president's office, and he was going to follow through with the commitment to see us, and we shot down there, and so that's how that happened.
Yeah. So let me move us to this moment, 2025. I don't need to get into politics with y'all. We have done that with plenty of other panels. But it occurs to me that the way that the U.S. is viewed in the world, whether the U.S. is viewed as a reliable partner, impacts what you're trying to do. As you watch USAID being gutted, as you watch major cuts to FEMA, how does that affect y'all? How does it change your work? Ann?
It makes it very difficult, obviously. I mean, one of the things that we're expecting right now is that we're going to be having to cover a huge gap that's been created. 40% of our funding disappeared overnight.
40% of your funding was federal government money.
That's correct. That's correct. And that's providing basic health access in our own country, in the state of Georgia. That's a lot of food, basic health access in Haiti. And it took a toll. So we're looking and barreling down right now this hurricane season and the fire season. And we know that we are not going to have the same assets, the experience, and the resources that were there before. I think it's all the more important right now that organizations like us are more resourced. We need more financing, but also we need to coordinate a lot better than what we have. Our organization has launched a platform where we're trying to force coordination with the emergency management agencies so we can avoid overlap. We know what everyone's doing, but do it in real time in an actual visible dashboard that everyone, as well as the affected, can have access to.
Can you just be specific? Because I want people to understand what the potential impact is. What is something you were planning to do that you're now maybe not going to be able to do?
You know, one of the things that we see over and over again is that there's a lot of cities and states and places that have never been hit before with these natural disasters. They are under-resourced, they are inexperienced. It's different from a place like Florida that has a lot of experience. The population knows how to respond, they're a bit better prepared. So in those places, we know that we're going to have to, from soup to nuts, provide a lot more support with a lot fewer resources, and that is frightening because these are the places that we're seeing pop up a lot more than we have in the past.
Sean, jump in on this. I saw something you said. You mentioned Hurricane Katrina and what an eye-opener that was for you now 20 years ago. And you said that you had a transformative realization when you went down and looked at the aftermath of Hurricane Katrina, that even under the best of circumstances, which Katrina certainly wasn't, governments, and I'm quoting, can't handle these things by themselves.
Right.
I read that and I thought, shouldn't they though? Isn't that the job of the government to look after its citizens, to keep us safe?
Well, there's a citizen's job too. You're looking at personally, I believe there should be mandatory service, and for me, not just incentivized. I mean, I feel I missed out on that in a way, and it took me a long time just to get to a point where I started to engage in the ways that I'm talking about. There's another camp that would argue for incentivized, but I think that just make it part of the personality of our country, and to become fluent civics would help, right? Yeah. Also, and so. Where it is now, I think, clearly we're in what my father, as he would refer to the blacklist period that he was subject to. It's a bump it's a speed bump in the road of a great experiment, and I think we have to look at it that way. And so with service, while I agree with everything Ann said. I say, with these things, it's not the challenge that you wanted, but it's the challenge we have. And so one of the things when we talk, is to say, okay, we were this big. Rather than stay this big and do less well, let's find out how do you turn an army into a special operations force. It's that kind of, like, how do we make the best of, better than what we did yesterday, tomorrow, even if it's in more targeted ways, with the ambition of finding a way to build that size and scale that we know we are able to work in. What's heartbreaking about it is that you lose periods like this time. We won't be helping to build leaders in these places. That's probably the best part of my job here, is watching what's happened in these communities all around the world that we've worked. It's so moving and so inspiring, and it's so needed. And so that feels productive, and I hate to see that diminished.
May I ask, this is a very human question, but as you're talking, I'm looking at you thinking, you're a movie star. You've won Academy Awards, plural. You don't have to do any of this. You don't have to live in a tent in Haiti. You could be waving to us from your balcony at Cannes. Why?
Well, I really think, I don't know. I mean, I know what a movie star is, but I don't feel like that thing. I don't think most of my colleagues do. I feel like this is no different than that. I don't really differentiate between the things that I do. It's one life, and the part we're talking about now is, to me, it's just a devotion to citizenship.
Your celebrity does bring scrutiny, as you know. And I want to ask about an investigation that Bloomberg published in 2023 with the headline, Sean Penn's disaster relief charity ended up a money mess. They documented allegations at core of financial mismanagement and mishandled donor funds and sexual misconduct by core staff and your partners. Did you grow too fast?
Well, first of all, it should be said, those are the original headlines.
Yes.
And we kicked their butt in the truth of it. That's not to say that we didn't have leaks to patch. We did. And in some ways, it's a good thing that there's a lot of times this is sort of a cases taken on that directly related to us or to partners we worked with and things. And it's a very, is it litigious or period?
I think my question, we don't need to get into all the twists and turns of the litigation, but in terms of lessons learned, a lot of us can relate to you start a business, an organization small, and then it grows really fast.
This was in 2020 when COVID just started in March. And every 3 months, we kept asking each other, let's just go for 3 more months. I think it's only going to last 3 more months.
Yeah.
Imagine building a team of 7 people to 3,000. So at the peak of COVID in November 2020, we were doing 50,000 tests per day. Sean and I asked each other when we knew we did not have the systems put in place to be able to handle that load, what's the greater risk? Stop all activities and testing? The greater risk was not doing something. That was the choice that we made, and something that I will never regret. One of the things that we came out of was a much stronger organization that since that first unexpected, rapid expansion from 7 employees to 3,000.
In 11 months.
In 11 months.
It's a big HR.
Since then, we have had perfect audits, and we are an extremely transparent and reliable organization that we're very proud of. So next health pandemic around the world, we're ready for it.
Last question, and I will aim this at you, Anne, first, and then Sean. On the panel that came right before you, Dasha opened it talking about we're in a moment where it feels like the world is on fire, where everything is teetering or broken, and there's so many things that demand our attention. My question to you, how do you decide what to prioritize? There's so many places where the need is so great. And when you're there, how do you decide when you're done? How do you know when it's time to go home?
So for us, it's, what we're finding in our space is that, unfortunately, it's the eyeballs that drive money and that drive assistance, which for us is quite frustrating because there's so many places that are in such great need that aren't getting that. So our approach is to kind of look at where are the places of greatest need that aren't getting the attention, that need the most help, where we can make a difference. Everyone has sort of their special sauce, and we feel very strongly that ours is that we can pretty much go down anywhere and figure shit out rapidly. So one of the places that I'm very proud of that we've been able to go into is in Sudan. It's never in the news, and yet we're still there. Haiti, we still continue to be there. We have a process by which we really sort of look at where we can make the most impact with the very small dollars that we have. But because we're flexible and adaptive, we can make that impact. In terms of how long we stay, it's really a function of what the community is actually in need of. I mean, we hire locally, so the teams become sort of working from inside out. So for example, in North Carolina, when Sean and I first went there after the big floods in Lumbee County with the Lumbee tribe, we're still there. And that community, our first contact, our community leader, who's now become our incredible director, for North Carolina has been completely transforming the organization based on what is needed in the community, from health during COVID to the opioid crisis to response after Milton and Helene. So it's really, again, adapting and not having a strict sort of path, but allowing the community to dictate to us what's needed.
Sean, last word.
I think that a part to that is how your criteria. A lot of times it has to do with where you'll find good partnership, where communities are ready to help themselves and have an understanding of how to do it. They just need a boost. But also there's the part of it that whether it has to do with resources that we can bring in or diminished resources and so on. You know, sometimes you can get caught in, I do in my personality, the macro. I want to fix this thing. And that can get sometimes even in some circumstances where I've felt a kind of futility. And that's when you have to be ready to shift to the micro and say, but I can help Mary. You know, and so between us, it's either one or the other, waking the other up in the middle of the night or something. And she'll say, you know, what do you think about Sudan? Send me a card.
You say I'm already there. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mary Louise. Thank you so much, Sean. Thanks for Ann. We still have an amazing bookend to it. And to talk about the Sudan, we started this session on the 25th with Emi Mahmoud, who is a Sudanese refugee and gave a very powerful poem about finding more light. And I think about the light of the work that they're doing. I think about the often quoted Edison that Walter Isaacson always loves to say, ideas without action are mere hallucinations. So how do we take all the ideas that we've listened to over the last week and we put them into action? Well, artistically, we do it with the Harmon Eisner Artist in Residence. Teddy Abrams has been an amazing artist in resident. It's a 2025, so this is just halfway through the year, Teddy. And Teddy joins the ranks of folks like Anna DeVere Smith, who's in the audience, Jeff Koons, who spoke at Afternoon of Conversation, Frank Gehry, Ava DuVernay. You've got Lil Buck, Yo-Yo Ma, even Damian Wetzel, who is leading Juilliard Station. And so we're going to finish the 2025 Aspen Ideas Festival with that culture and music that Dan Porterfield, our president and CEO, said is so part of this place. And I want to hand it over to Teddy and say thank you so much for your participation in this festival. And thank you to all of you. Everyone, Teddy Abrams.
Thank you. Thanks, Graham. And thank you all so much for making this festival so extraordinary and so very special. And it is a tremendous honor and a daunting one to close out the Ideas Festival, especially with so many brilliant people that have been on this stage and throughout every one of the stages here this last week. And I've been thinking about the many different experiences that we've all had listening together and contemplating. And so many of, I think, these discussions are like today's discussions. There are elements of fear, discussions that suggest the great pains and tragedies of our time, and examples of extraordinary fortitude and hope, and people doing the right thing. And in that context, I thought a little bit about what music is, what art can be, and just to briefly tell you what we've tried to do back at my hometown orchestra in Louisville. Louisville, Kentucky is a place that is full of the same paradigms, the same challenges. The America that you know exists in Louisville and Kentucky that surrounds it. When I got there in 2014, I realized that Kentucky was not a monolith. It had all of these same challenges that we could work on as a kind of experiment, but only if we thought bigger about what an institution like an orchestra might be. We came up with this idea to address one of the great intractable challenges in America, which is this divide between people. It seems to be the subject that we've been circling all week here at the Aspen Ideas Festival. And in Kentucky, that divide is very obvious. It's the urban, it's the rural. It's the socio-political divide that we see every day in our state. And we've tried to address it in so many different ways, but I thought that as an artist, it's incumbent upon me to use whatever resources I have, not just to make the art and hope that people come to it, but to literally take it and see what the art can do when it binds our society together. And along those lines, we went to the Kentucky General Assembly, which is an 80% Republican majority at that body, and we said, give us a chance to address this challenge. Let the orchestra, let music be the thing that brings our state together. And they said, you should have that chance. We have taken the orchestra now for the last 3 years to every single part of Kentucky because of 2 rounds of $4.3 million grants the General Assembly has given us. We go to every part of our state, rural places that have never had an orchestra show up before, places that feel deep suspicion or zero connection to Louisville, in an effort to do the kind of ambassadorial work that music is meant to do. It's the universal language, but it doesn't mean anything unless you do something with it. And so that's what we've been doing there, and I'm very, very proud of that work. And now to close out the program with a little bit of music, because we've just said it has these aspirational capabilities. In 1893, Catherine Lee Bates took a trip to Pikes Peak, which is about 100 miles away from here. When she got up to the top of the mountain, all of a sudden, the words to America the Beautiful emerged in her mind. It's an example of a song and a poem that speaks about the great beauty around us, about America as a place that we all share. It is the Aspen idea right there. An English teacher out in nature trying to connect people by bringing all of these human elements together. Then 50 years later, in the middle of World War II, Aaron Copland was asked to write a fanfare that would rouse the spirits, would maybe speak to the times. Instead of writing a militant kind of fanfare, something that evoked a typical march, he turned out the fanfare for the common man. A piece of music that said, it's actually all of you that need to be celebrated. It's the recognition that all of you are ourselves. And if we remember that through art and music, which does connect us, then perhaps peace is possible. And so I know this is a very uncommon room of individuals, but in that spirit, I'd like to do a little bit of improvisation based on those 2 themes, and we can take that message, that fanfare for the common man, back to all the places that we live the rest of the year and continue the conversations, continue the thinking that we've experienced this last week, and let's see what happens.
and that concludes the 2025 Aspen Ideas Festival. Thank you, Teddy Abrams. Thank you to Alan Fletcher and the Aspen Musical Festival and School and all the student performers. And please make sure to come over to the Marble Garden Village. We're having a closing day picnic. And please join us next year, the same dates, June 25th to July 1st, on this beautiful Bayer Design campus. Looking forward to enjoying a final meal with you, and thank you so much for your participation.